Hello, all, and welcome to our session of Open Future Forum on collectively advancing best practices and building knowledge commons. So wonderful to see so many new faces here who haven't been in some of the other sessions, and to see those of you who have stuck around. For this particular session, we'll have some facilitation, scribing, convening from Aram Armstrong here from Imagine.World in Nourish, Hawaii, and many other efforts. And first, I want to briefly thank our co-conveners for Open Future Forum. You'd think I'd have them memorized by now. Just one moment. I'd like to thank the American Sustainable Business Network, Bluefin Investment, the Ecorestoration Alliance, El Puente, Global Unity, the Guild of Future Architects, Heartland P5, Imagine.World, Institute of Ecotechnics, Intergen Family, Kinship Earth, North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Partnerships for Change, Pro-Social World, Reconsider, Toxic Free Future for Our Children, and the Triangle Foundation for your collaborative efforts in making this convening possible. And this is going to be a bit of a participatory co-design session. I know that we've had some of you teed up to specifically share your work, and there will be plenty of opportunity to do that. But first, I'm going to pop a Miro link into the chat. We're going to share that as we follow along. And not to fear if you're not, if you're on your phone or you're not feeling as able to participate in the Miro, we'll also be doing some scribing as well. So here's that link. So when Aram and I were preparing for this session, we realized that there's so many dense layers of this conversation, and we noticed that there were three particular threads that were starting to pop up here. One is around more of kind of that deep research. How do we advance the academic knowledge? Another ongoing inquiry is around kind of how do we organize that knowledge? It's come up so many times this week that we have so many rich repositories of whether it's research, whether it's videos of events like this, or other forms of sort of record or knowledge sharing. What are some of the systems and practices that we need to have in place to better organize and cross-pollinate some of that knowledge? And then related to that, how do we then kind of improve the cross-pollination of the on-the-ground solutions in libraries? So we'll be kind of, rather than having discrete conversations on those three different topics, we're going to allow them to kind of weave throughout, because I know various of you here are approaching it from various of these lenses. And so Aram's going to help with kind of color coding what's kind of coming up from each thread, and we'll do our best to sense make from there. And to start today, and I'll pop into a screen share of that Miro board in a moment too, so that you can follow along. In that Miro, we do have a little section that says hello, and I welcome all of you who are here. If you'd like to put kind of your name, where you're coming from, maybe even your contact info in your sticky, so that we can track through the totality of who's here, because there are so many, and we won't have time to do full intros from everybody. But in particular, I'd love to name some who are directly doing work within this space, who are here with us today. Deborah Snyder from Institute of Ecotechnics, Keala Young from Culture Seed and VillageLab, Kirk Bergstrom from Imagine.World, John Schull from Ecorestoration Alliance, Jeff Clearwater from VillageLab, Nathan Gray from Geoversity, Caroline Paulick-Thiel from Politics for Tomorrow, Vincent from Catalyst Network, Mickael Levy from Academia Biospherica, and Becca Harman from Regen Network. And where we were thinking we might kick off as a little bit of an icebreaker today, there's a little section here in the Miro that's called the sort of zombie projects and lost children. Sometimes it helps us kind of enter a space of relationality to share the areas where we've kind of struggled or failures that we've had. And so we wanted to just open this space by actually inviting the sharing of any frustrations or failures or learnings you've recently come up against. We'll keep that part brief But I welcome to just raise your hand or wave, and we'll just invite a couple of those to start. Yes,
I'll start since I have the first one in there. And it was my silly idea to do the icebreaker this way. But I mean, the wonderful thing about these knowledge sharing projects is there's a great hope that something will come to life, and you do this research and start to create a structure to fill it up. And oftentimes, there's challenges about the long-term roadmap of these projects, whether they'll be funded or staffed, who's maintaining them, how do you deal with things that go out of date. So what I'm sharing is a deck that was supposed to be like a landscape of tools for specifically focused on integrated landscape management for the 1,000 Landscapes group. And it was ambitious, and we wrote proposals for months and months and months and months. And eventually we did a reorg, and it's been abandoned since 2017. And I'm like, oh, there's always potential. But there's also just like I guess the lesson I learned from it was the importance of who's holding the data and or the information, and how does it continue to sustain itself? What's that mechanism, that body or that container? If you have post-its, and just an orientation of the space, if you want to make post-its, I didn't make enough post-its maybe, you can just pull them from the side. There's a little menu off to the left side that says sticky note, or you can press the N key on your keyboard and it'll automatically open that up for you, and you can pick a color and plop that into the space. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Grace, I see your hand.
Yeah, so I'm not a professional in this specific area, but I do work a lot in the area of collaboration. And I've been parts of many of these projects in terms of like people have invited me to put my organization or myself into their database, and then I never hear about it again. Right? Murmurations is one of those projects. And I know the project is continuing, but I, as somebody who's supposedly a contributor, a participant, somebody who's put myself on the map, I haven't even heard about it, right? And I have this sense that there are a lot of these projects that are looking to create these databases. And I also, I was a knowledge professional for a long time. I was working in technical documentation, and I remember inside of corporate, like there's always this challenge. How do you make sure everybody just in your company, right? These are for-profit, gets the information they need about the company itself on their desktop. And this is a challenge that hasn't even been managed properly within these companies with tremendous amounts of money, where there's money on the line for it. And the only actual solution that I've seen that works is like your Facebook feed, and it's not optimized the way you would want this optimized. But I do think that we need to be thinking in those terms. And I do think there's tremendous potential in the data that we have. So if you think about some of these projects, and I've been listening into the project, and they're so interesting, there's things that we know about one another, or that a smart AI could know. Rainfall, altitude, types of wildlife, all those things could be in a database. Because if it turns out that I've got to go sift through all of these projects to find the one similar to mine, that's impossible. But if I have some sort of algorithmic way that it matches my problem and my altitude and my bioregional, like in some of these things together, there's real hope for that. And those tools exist today. And my concern is that I never hear anybody talking about it this way. It's like, how do we create a central repository? How do we create a central repository? How do we create, and I think all of us are way, way too spoiled for that. We're just, I'm moving all of my stuff off of Google Drive and onto like something that's not Google for, privacy reasons. And I realized I'm going to have to file my files. Because until now, I just typed in something and Google popped it up for me. I didn't have to put it in a directory. I didn't have to remember where. It was like, we're so spoiled that, forget the Dewey Decimal System, if anybody knows what that is anymore, right? We need directories that work for us, and I think we need to start thinking in that direction.
Thank you. Great. I think that's a really good thread for a part we're going to get into in a bit too. Thanks. Over to you, George, and then we'll just tee up one or two more, and then we'll get into some positivity from a brief moment.
Thanks. I agree. Bucky talked about the geoscope. So, right now we've got James Webb Space Telescope. We've got planet.com feeding us cosmic information. We can organize it with geolocated data to each individual, to each ecosystem. I think one of the things we've been doing is we've been trying to connect everything from the perspective of humans. I think that's a big mistake because humans are made to change. We're not stable. We should actually be connecting everything from the perspective of nature. Instead of Facebook, we should be looking at Placebook. And the other thing is we're in a spot of transition right now with humanity. And I liken it to planetary puberty. We all understand we have bodies that changed from not being able to make life to being able to make life and create a new future for each other. So we have a great opportunity right now that as we know the technology exists. Let's weave it together. Let's learn from the engineering community because, we in the same time we've been struggling with these issues, we've gone from horse and buggies to Formula One cars and self-driving cars. We've gone from the Wright brothers to launching into space and fighter planes and the James Webb Space Telescope. Why? Because we've allowed engineers to share best practices and evolve, unencumbered by political rhetoric and polarized, idiotic thinking. We can do that now. So look forward to working together with everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, George. Over to you, David.
As we're talking real time, I'm tracking conversations and lenses from various points of view and architecting some of the data structure for connection and how we weave these things together. And the question that's living with me now is the why. When I built a system for $2 million with the Gates Foundation money for Ashoka, which is one of the largest NGOs, like $70 million a year budget in DC, and they fund social entrepreneurship. But they were siloed in their domains and their categories. And so it's really like what keeps people engaged. This kind of thing right now, which I'm hungry for connection. I want to see other change makers. I want to see inspirational things. That's the reason why I'm showing up, is to meet other people. So if we have the human element and then our bodies are pain, pleasure based. Like if you have pleasure in nature, you want to go see it grow. So what are the things that build, that strengthen the bonds, almost like what makes people connect to one another, like to be like family, community? What are the things that weave that together so that we have reason to stay connected? That's, to me, more than the information, is the why behind why we stay in community.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I think that's a wonderful transition into the people part. Next, I'd like to dive into it and show a little bit more of who's in the room right now. And we're going to keep it brief for the first round. I know that some of you were kind of teed up to share your work. And initially, I'd like for everyone to keep to about 3 minutes, starting with kind of those that we'd had on that list, 2 to 3 minutes, whatever you feel called to share, and just your brief description of kind of who you are, where you're calling in from, and what solution you're bringing to the table in your work kind of actively around convening tools, processes, contexts for whether it's convening around knowledge commons or best practice sharing. I'd like to see what the current thinking is in the room. And if you want to close that too with what the main kind of challenge or obstacle is that you're kind of seeing and bringing that forward, because maybe we'll have some echoes of assistance for that in this space as well. I'm happy to go Socratic because I have a list, but if anyone who is teed up would like to volunteer first, feel free to raise your hand. Deborah.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wow, a knowledge commons. I think I'm dreaming. I have to pinch myself to wake up. Since 1985, when I published the Biosphere catalog, back in the day when people didn't know how to spell the word biosphere, to spell it every time, trying to put together a structure for approach of a study of the biosphere was our task in those days. And it is how to structure the information was something that we took on in long conversations with a small group of people that began to emerge. Eventually, our biomic projects that we were working on led to designing and building Biosphere 2 project in Arizona, which is a large laboratory for global ecology. And we had 1,000 sensors in there, and we were measuring everything in the air and the water and the atmosphere. And it was a lot of data that was being collected. So we were like, okay, how can we organize this data? And we recognized that data is different from information. There is just a lot of data everywhere. And part of the overload is how do you convert data into information and then build knowledge. So we started a group called SysWebTech, Solar Systems Information on Biospheres, Technospheres, Expeditions, and Culture. And we identified those as the main kind of like spheres on the planet. And we called ourselves cyberspherians. We were going to, our next project after Biosphere 2 was to build a cybersphere, a sphere of intelligence, like a noosphere, getting up to a noosphere in Vernadsky's terms, of collective wisdom that would help to manage the planet. Back in those days, I think some people might remember the planetary guide to the Gaia Guide to Planetary Management that came out at the same time as the Biosphere catalog. Well, it's when the internet came in, then all bets were off because there was no channel for how to put in all that, how to organize all that data. So yes, I'm looking for tools. I believe in my mentor or my idol in those days was Harry Seldon. Harry Seldon and the Encyclopedia Galactica project that he started. So for me, what I see here is this is the knowledge commons right here in this meeting. So it's the beginning. That's why it makes me so happy, because we are pumping out the noise. Our motto was to gather the bits, pump out the noise, recycle the info, and increase knowledge. So that's a little bit where I'm coming from in this. And thank you for organizing this, pretty futuristic thinking, but we need it now, discussion.
Thank you so much, Deborah. I think in this session, the best we can hope is to get to the table of contents, but hopefully.
Okay, yeah, I'll share, I'll scan this in.
Yeah. And anyone like to volunteer themselves next? All right, I'm gonna start going through the list. Keala, are you on?
Hello, I am here. I feel like I would like to share perhaps a little later in the flow. One thing that I noticed is that, and I don't know if the folks from VillageLab.ca are here, but there's a tag for them on the board, and I think it points at the fact that yeah, there can be many different people using similar intentions or similar efforts. I know that this group is doing something slightly different than VillageLab.net, which is I don't know if Jeff's here today or not. But we're doing some different work. But I think the problems, the other space I've been in that I would mention is the Collaborative Tech Alliance, and I see some other folks that are involved there also on the call. And I would say that solving for these knowledge commons and knowledge repository situations is essentially to try and maintain the accuracy and the currency of the data, and also in that sense the security, but also the ability to share so we don't have the redundancy of kind of siloing of information and or partitions when there really needn't be one between groups. But I don't have any solutions to present today necessarily, just a bunch of years, kind of digging in it, and then using as much as possible these ecological analogs for how we can be doing the living systems approaches to this, knowledge gardening, etc. I'll leave it there for someone else to pick up. Thank you, and maybe I'll circle back.
Yeah, thanks, Keala. I think your way of thinking and being in this space will be a wonderful contribution. I'm going to hand it along. Oh, Charlie.
Yeah, I hope I'm not messing up your order, but I think there's I think everybody, it seems just automatically right off the bat, everybody's got a pretty good grasp on this coming into it, like has been in all the conferences. I've done some work in a lot of databases, and including open data, and what I've found in every scenario is if you can't keep open access to the data coming in, and it can't come from where people need to send it from, they fall apart. And I wonder if it's not a repository that we're looking with, but a way to connect the data. And what you really need is a vetting process, a peer review, not a governance, so to say, but you've got to allow for organic growth of thought to come, and not have this thing get siloed or bought. And that's what happens. That's what happened with the internet. It got commercialized, the access, so maybe it's not a repository because there's a giant repository right here on the screen. All of us have it deep and in depth in different ways. But how do we come up with a common agreement on what the truth is? I mean, that's the challenge of the day, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Charlie. Well, I trust we'll get to some good synthesis of some of these challenges towards the end. I'd love to hear from Kirk Bergstrom next, if you're in the mix.
Thank you. Well, I want to acknowledge a couple of my Imagine.World colleagues, Aram, who's doing the Miro facilitation, and Harriet Brainerd as well. And, looking at the faces, I'm reminded of sharing this journey with many of you for a lot of years. It's great to see you, Nathan Gray, and of course, George and Jim from the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and Deborah. So we really are connected and connecting, and that's a really beautiful thing. In my 3 minutes or less, I will try to share a little bit about some work we are doing in Hawaii. And our Imagine.World initiative is really about how do you practice systems change design? How do you orchestrate systems change design? And so we have a wonderful opportunity in Hawaii working with a partner called Transforming Hawaii's Food System together to really take a comprehensive look at what a transformation of Hawaii's food system would be over a 10-year period. And as some of you know that saw the presentation I did yesterday, one of the earliest steps was a system mapping process. And I would like to share a few screens from that for those that have not seen the work. And what we're discovering is that, systems change is a version of herding cats, and yet people really do want to collaborate. They want to co-learn and co-design. And something like a system mapping process really helps nurture that collaboration across sectors, across disciplines. And so let me just quickly share some screens and talk about that work. All right. So this is a website called Nexio, which kind of specializes in system mapping visualization. This is kind of a big picture look at the goals for this Transforming Hawaii's Food System together. And one of the things that we realized early on is that to kind of orchestrate a systems change initiative, we really needed to provide a framework that was one that everyone could kind of agree to and plug into. So this is kind of a system innovation process that we proposed. And then we started to scaffold what was already being done, some initial research, some policy recommendations, and kind of framed it as an ongoing process. And I think yesterday I shared this theory of change map. And one of the things we realized about the work in Hawaii was that we really needed to connect the past, present, and future. And virtually any systems change initiative really does need to acknowledge the past. And in Hawaii, of course, there's a deep resonance with the indigenous community and their experience. So part of this particular map layer is that we have these historical timelines. And if you see in the right-hand column, as I move over these different time periods, you start to see, you know, what were important trends and events for the food system. And then we also did some work with our stakeholder network in really defining root causes and doing root cause analysis, which we found to be a really important part of the process. And then envisioning the future in terms of some outcomes that would occur over a 10-year period. And one of the most important things has been to sort of put together a statewide food system planning network, which continues to grow, and then figure out how to orchestrate that both in face-to-face convenings and through a digital platform. And all of this has led to, you know, a joint definition of various interventions. Here's an example of kind of 6 high-level ones. The system mapping software lets you get more granular, so you can break that out into sub-interventions. But this really has been helpful in terms of both making sure we're representing the issues people are concerned about, and then providing a framework for things like working groups to form and so forth. And lastly, I'll just show this one because one of the outcomes also was to sort of define these planning areas that again would inform forward work and implementation. And so in this model, if I break it out into sub areas, you'll see things emerge like you know, ecological sustainability, and in the right-hand column, we have metrics that are appropriate at a statewide level, but that are leading to the SDGs as part of a global transformation. So that's just a quick look, and I think what's been, you know, most encouraging for us is that, you know, we're seeing that this idea of framing a systems change process, giving people kind of this visual dashboard, has been instrumental in creating a sense of common purpose, letting people kind of imagine a preferred future, and then setting the table for working groups to emerge that really are going to be the on-the-ground implementation. So thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Kirk. And we're also grabbing some of these solutions and the links and popping them in the Miro so that we can all have access to those as they emerge and spend some more time, because that's so rich what you shared. That brief screen share certainly didn't do it justice. Next, I'd love to hear, I think that's actually a really wonderful lead-in potentially to the work, Caroline, that you're doing with 10 by 100 and Politics for Tomorrow. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much for having me, and hello from Berlin. Yes, I'm so inspired what was just mentioned and shown, because this is really something that we're looking for. I'm Caroline, director at Politics for Tomorrow. Since the last 2 years, part of the core team for developing a new smart city strategy here in Berlin. We work mostly with governmental organizations at the intersection to civil society. I'm coming today from a workshop with our libraries network, understanding how they actually become third places, digital third places, and this is my day-to-day work. But I think why, Caitlin, you invited me is because we kicked off a new initiative, and I think it might actually add something to the things that have been said already. And if you don't mind, I will share my screen briefly as well, and just go like this, because I'm not completely set up. But I think what you mentioned, and I think where we are looking at right now is, yes, knowledge commons on the one hand, also, let's say, the science on the one hand, and the practice and the implementation gaps on the other. And I think I don't have to say very much about the strategic risk that we see emerging in front of our eyes right now. And it doesn't match with the current practice, especially from my perspective, working with public organizations. They have something that is very incremental, really trying to better themselves, but sustaining the current systemic approach and not actually getting out into a mode that is more strategic. So we have many strategic gaps, but what we want to encourage is a more responsive approach. We also know that this approach needs to be a portfolio approach. Speaking from Germany today, looking at the energy crisis that we're facing currently, we know there is a need for rapid crisis response, but if this rapid crisis response isn't nested in long-term futures and leads to systemic change, we're actually creating even bigger problems, even bigger gaps than we're already in. So it's about not only treating the symptoms, but also addressing the causes. And I think that's the work that many of you are doing. If we look at the current criticality of the next 1,000 days, we can actually understand that this is the work of Carlota Perez studying technological revolutions, that something is emerging. Name it the age of planetary consciousness, give it another name, but we can already see the collapse of the old and the necessity for readjustment. Looking at the IPCC, we are actually all called to peak emissions by the end of 2024 in order to have a climate resilient pathway. And we think that the next 1,000 days are actually crucial to pave the way for developing a current practice. This is why this initiative that is come into life with Dark Matter Labs and the European Forum Outbach and other organizations is a kind of call to action to actually take this time frame serious and say these 1,000 days are so valuable, and how can we divide them into 100-day chunks to actually create a different type of feedback, a different type of learning, and a different type of more drastic interventions. And this is what we're just starting to build. And I think the knowledge that you have shared and also the practices are fitting perfectly into building a match and understanding how do we phase the new practices in that you have been prototyping, that you have been standardizing over the last decades, but also how do we exnovate, how do we phase the current path dependencies out, and how can we use this specific time. So if there's anybody in the room that we can connect with to understand how do we organize these 100-day learn act loops and actually also build an emotional engagement that was mentioned, a kind of motivation portfolio around it, so people can actually stay on track, they can see a kind of development within themselves, but also how can we build a data layer that is helping us to, during each 100-day gathering that we would like to organize, map the strategic gaps and do a kind of crowd crisis forecast to understand the windows of liquidity and encourage each other, but also, let's say, institutional framework for more drastic policy action in order to meet the kind of openness of the public to go for a change that they will actually be open for when shocks are hitting, when shortages are coming, but that need to be prepared on the policy layer much earlier onwards. So it's a new way of understanding what is ahead and doing a little strategic forecasting together. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Caroline. To that end, I'm curious about here, and please do paste any links in the chat, and we'll be sure to put those on the Miro board, and we'll also be sending follow-ups to forum participants to connect everybody. But if you want to make sure that you're taken down as someone who is in this session, be sure to put your names in the stickies in that Miro that was shared at the beginning of the session. And I'm going to share that link again for anybody who joined late in a moment. But I'd like to pass it over next to Jim Fournier, because I think you have some relevant learnings in terms of data and some adjacencies here that I'd love to hear.
Thank you. It's great to be here and see a lot of old friends and some familiar faces. I've been back and forth between sustainability and tech for several decades. Right now, I'm pretty deeply focused on the tech side. We've shifted into Web3 this year. One huge milestone was Ethereum finally moving off of proof of work, which allowed us to feel that we can participate in that space. For people who, I'm going to speak a little bit more technically, because for the people who are working at that level, what we're doing could be useful. We have long been working on something called JLink, which lets you move data between different databases under human readable agreements. The agreements are written in JSON and actually something called JSON LD that lets you move data between databases. We think this is actually really important for functional data. Some data is open, but a lot of things need to be moved under permission before they can be moved. And if you put AI at endpoints where you have agreement about what they can do, they can shift from something scary to more tools that we could use across the network. The way this functionally works is that you have this data exchange as sort of a pipe with APIs at either end, and you can, use those APIs to connect to it. What we've been doing this year is moving to something we're calling JLinks, which makes this really decentralized in a Web3 sense, so that we can have data DApps that can address each other. And as we started to do this, we realized that to do DApps that are really decentralized, there's one thing you need to anchor, which is time, the sequence of data. And right now, the state of the art is to do that on monetized blockchains. And these create a lot of overhead and are very slow. And literally in the last couple of weeks, we've been dragged kicking and screaming to where just in the last couple of days, we've realized we're putting up what's called a layer 1 blockchain. But it's a blockchain that only does one thing. It anchors the sequence of events for DApps. And this creates a absolutely minimum cost system for exchanging data between decentralized applications with no overhead and no carbon emissions. It also gives us a vehicle where we can raise capital, and it's quite plausible in a few years we might have a foundation that can power a lot of other things. I'm specifically using this for carbon accounting data. I'm connected with a woman who came out of the accounting industry that says carbon accounting isn't accounting because it doesn't have an audit trail. And when we add an audit trail to carbon data, and I'm not talking about carbon credits, I'm talking about just being able to exchange the data in CO2e between systems across supply chains, it actually begins to push society to count things in something other than dollars. And because corporations have committed to reporting this, it's become a driver for their behavior. The accounting department in the corporations now really cares about the quality of their carbon reporting. So this gives us a way of doing auditable, decentralized carbon accounting reporting, either upstream from a carbon credit or just across supply chains. We are in the process of setting up something called carbonpath.org that would be just basically facilitating these 500 and 1,000-pound gorillas, the big corporations that are all trying to own this space, in interoperable carbon accounting. We can also use this data across a lot of the other things we're talking about here, and I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for doing this, Kevin.
Thank you so much, Jim. I love the depths and breadth that we're getting into here, and I know you were definitely speaking the language of some of us here.
I apologize for going over the head of some, but to reach the ones I need to, I need to just go there. Thank you.
I get this as a previous comment said. I think everyone here has been in all the conferences, been in all the conversations. We're like, gosh, another conversation about knowledge commons. Let's get to it. And so I appreciate our just getting to it here. I'm going to pass it along next to Nathan Gray from Geoversity.
Well, boy, that's a tough act to follow, and I'm feeling even more self-conscious because I'm coming to you from Panama, And what the camera does not show is all those mud stains of, the ferrous soil that we have, and the neotropics is one of the most effective garment stains I've ever found. So I'm coming from 21 years of really hard work building up the Mamoni Valley Preserve, now covering over 12,500 acres. That's not very much in the scheme of things, but we're only 90 minutes from an international hub in Panama City. We're only, right across the hill from the Interoceanic Canal, the Panama Canal. And we are the green cushion for the autonomous peoples of the Kuna Nation. And candidly, it has been a struggle. We went from being earth trained, and back in the time of my friendship with you, Kirk, and with you, Deborah, Snyder, good to see you both, to Geoversity. But really what is at the base of everything we do, in addition to our founding commitment to support the emerging leaders, young people that are not waiting for the adults to clean up the mess, but are seeking to take action now and seek to have the skills, the network, and the ongoing support they need to actually make a difference and to do it quickly. But what is so different in the last 21 years is we're grounded in place. We're grounded in a deep partnership with Indigenous peoples, and it has been both profoundly rewarding and also has presented many interesting challenges. In our circle of naturalists, we have some of the most gifted naturalists, biologists, evolutionary biologists, and so forth. And then you'll take a walk from me. I get to be your guide, and I warn everybody, you go for a walk with me in a jungle for dummies. But I do bring with me on any hike, particularly with young people, 3 generative questions. And I'll only mention 2 for now. And when we look at whatever interests us, some morphology, a particular vine formation, or some aspect of animal behavior, one of the questions that we want to ask, taking into account Mother Nature doesn't solve problems, she selects for success. And that's why speciation is possible, because of that and because of cooperation. But the question number 1 is, when we see that phenomenon, what is Mother Nature, what opportunities is she seeking to seize? Then the other question, what are the constraints she's seeking to overcome? And as I reflected on the chance to have dialogue with you remarkable people, I thought, the hell with coming to the meeting with a brochure. 21 years, actually 31 years as an organization, I could fill hours with presentations. And I wanted to be sure I'm allowing as much time to get into the question, what is so key to us. What is the constraint we most seek to confront? And I'll tell you bluntly, as one who's been in the trenches, and I don't come into this as an environmentalist. I was one of the founders of Oxfam America. I came through the gateway called poverty, injustice, and inequity. So I come at it from that point of view. And what I'm seeing is there is a fundamental inequity in knowledge access, in access to the tools of communication. And our focus, maniacally, for all the tree planting, 500,000 trees and river restoration, all of that is simply to create a campus for the future pilots of Spaceship Earth. We are in urgent need of having young people, particularly indigenous, and particularly peoples of rural areas that are the most screwed over, the most abjectly neglected of any populations I've ever worked with anywhere. Even the poorest people in the inner city have at least access to a lot of tools of economic development and communication. In the country, it is a silent cry for survival. And so we're really very much tooling up for and looking for partnerships that allow young people not just to go to school, which of course is a mess anywhere in the world, and particularly in the third world, and particularly in Panama, but to really have internships, that we have mentors that say, okay, you're going to work with me for 3 months or 6 months, or better yet, a year, and you'll be in our home, in our workplace, in our minds, day in and day out. So you not only learn how to, whatever it is, speak English or do accounting, but that you learn how to operate powerfully inside of 21st century hegemonic systems. And that's the challenge. And so, you know, in my dialogue and my engagement with each of you, with us collectively, that's the constraint I am driven to overcome, hopefully, in that period of 1,000 days. I love that formulation. That is our formulation. We have no time to waste, and we certainly don't have any minds to waste. We must seize the moment.
Thank you so much, Nathan. So I'd mentioned in the chat, we're going to extend the session by about 5 to 7 minutes because we got that late start, and our next session's in the same room. We do have 3 more people teed up, and that should give us just a couple minutes to start to broach what some of those obstacles are at the end, what that that threshold a little bit. Next, I'm going to hand it over to Mickael from Academia Biospherica.
Okay, thanks. Some amazing thoughts. I'm humbled to be here, so thanks everyone. And I'm Mickael Ackerman from Matutu in southeast Brazil in the mountains. I'll put the link on the chat. And our reserve has partnered with some of the other projects that have been presented here. Las Casas de la Selva by Treaty, Ireon was presented by Oriol, and Synergia Ranch, Deborah has presented, and Pablo, who has spoken about the projects in the Andes. We have allied to form Academia Biospherica to increase the understanding of biospheric thinking, like Deborah was mentioning. And on the topic of knowledge commons, I think one of the challenges that we see is, okay, we want to now take the trainings that we have currently and bring it to a digital platform. But how do you also keep it understandable to local contexts? We want to make it universal, but also keep it accessible. So there's a pedagogist from Brazil called Paulick-Thiel, and he talks about when you bring knowledge to a certain place to teach, to use the local language. So our language is built by our surroundings, right? And so he proposes we use the vocabulary built from that local place. That's one of the challenges that we face. But then, like we mentioned here, I think Nathan mentioned, the access to knowledge is also linked to financial status. That's another challenge. So I'm just posing some of the questions that we have. I'm not bringing answers. I think I wouldn't dare. I think these are some of the main challenges, some of the questions that we have to pose ourselves. And well, the platform in itself, the digital platform, will have to be as flexible as we can and offer as much resources as possible, like go beyond whiteboards and quizzes and things. We need to go beyond workbooks and questions. How do we interact with knowledge and data? And Kirk, who is here, is also one of the thinkers, the initial thinkers of EarthX, who is a data visualization platform. It's also one of our partners. And so I think the way we visualize information helps a lot, and to be able to do that in a translated manner to each context will make it more accessible. And then we have another, that's a responsibility a lot of design. Designers can contribute on information architecture. And we've seen some beautiful presentations here. And another challenge we have that I think blockchain can help is to break down the cycle of bias and protection over corporate protection over data. So research is usually so much defended by a corporation, and when it's published, a lot of the sources and bibliography or the premises from which the research started are unveiled from the public. And there are projects that propose blockchain can help map the chain of decision making from the research, from references and references and references. So when the public will access it, they can see all the chain of decision making. So again, no answers, only posing some of the challenges that we've been questioning, we've been facing, and that will be critical on the subject here. Yeah.
Thank you, Mickael. So we're gonna just hear briefly from Vincent and then John, and then we're gonna close this out. But I'm hearing so many incredible threads already around I think knowing a lot of the folks in the room, I don't know that you're all aware of how much the solution is here, sitting right here between the threads for interoperability of data, highly structuring and having the audit trails for that data, visualizing it, mapping it. You're all, I think, puzzle pieces finding one another, and that's really exciting to see. So handing it over to you, Vincent.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. My name is Vincent Arena, calling in from Long Island, New York, and I'm founder of Catalyst Network. And what we've been working on for the last few years is, yes, platforms, but the more important piece that we kind of realized that we had to focus on was the protocols for creating knowledge networks that are interoperable, that can be across platform, but also can be across different languages. So one of the things I've seen from being in multiple different communities and networks is that we're all speaking different languages. And one of the core things that defines a network is shared language. And so I'm going to screen share an example of one of the things that we've been working on, which is how to connect different frameworks that communities use for categorization. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with frameworks such as the Sustainable Development Goals, the donut economic sectors, Maslow's hierarchy, the permaculture principles. So we've been mapping these different frameworks that different networks are using to categorize projects or categorize events. And then realizing that these different frameworks are all connected. So between the UN SDGs, the Wheel of Co-Creation, and the donut economics, if you look at the different domains within these just these three frameworks, you could see economics is shared by the Wheel of Co-Creation, and decent work and economic growth is a related sector within the SDGs. And so mapping these different domains to one another is one of the best practices that we've come across in order to allow each community to choose which framework they want to use to categorize knowledge, but then be able to create a translation system. So if I have a platform that categorizes all of our projects by SDGs, and we map the SDGs to an ontology that you create on a different platform, there's still a way to have interoperability across the platforms while allowing people to both speak and understand in their own language. So I'm I'll post a link to that. Happy to talk to anyone here who's building databases and who cares about ontologies that can work across different mapping efforts. And I'll just share one other thing, which we've been creating a lot of integrations with Airtable and realizing that a lot of mapping projects are happening in tools that are not designed for collaboration across networks. Airtable and Google Sheets are kind of designed for the like for-profit corporation. And so we built an extension to Airtable that lets you basically map up the different fields in a database. This is a database of transformational communities. It lets you import that data into one of our tools called a trove, and be able to then filter and view this information in different ways. So this is a list of transformational communities which you can explore and filter by the different sectors or by location. You can view this information on a map. You can have your own private notes or public comments. So like allowing layers to have your own perspective over the same data. And then also be able to have a crowdsourced way of creating connections between these different organizations. So this is the network map view, which we have an integration with Kumu to sync the data with Kumu. And so as part of the Collaborative Tech Alliance, one of the other protocols is once this data is in here, how do you allow it to be exported to multiple different formats? So if you create a trove, you can export it to Markdown, and you can copy and paste this data into a wiki with Markdown, to an RSS feed, to just a simple bullet list, or anything from like JSON that you can import into a Kumu or a knowledge graph. So to kind of summarize, we've been figuring out, okay, if there's 5 or 6 Airtable databases of projects, how do we allow those to be federated and synced together, and then allow the export of that federated data to then be able to be inputs into lots of other tools and visualizations.
Thank you so much, Vincent. I cannot wait to interoperate with that. Passing it over to you, John.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you so much. Vincent, I think you may have hit a sweet spot. We're all struggling at the different levels, but what you just had to show strikes me as a really important missing piece of the puzzle. I will be following up. I'll screen share, and I'll just try to be brief. First, I just want to share a conceptual model that it seems to me emerges from this conversation. There is the universe, and it's its own thing, and then there's our frame, and the problem is, and that frame might have science and spirit and meaning and community as sort of the poles of the way we find ourselves in the universe. But then you've got, let's say, the established order, and it is out of alignment with this group. What this group is struggling for is shared values, shared knowledge, and tools, and collective agency. And I've actually been thinking about that higher level puzzle right now. And I'm not going to go through this presentation in detail, but I would welcome your comments on your input, because I think at a high level, this misalignment between this very inspiring and very powerful group and the larger system is what we're struggling with. And I think it might be relevant to this question of the next 100 days and the 100 days after that and the 100 days. And we don't have that many before we're either going to go from this current moment in transition into, I'm assuming you can see my screen here, into this red zone where we are in deep shit, or begin to pull things back from the brink. And my story goes like this. First of all, it's that our subcommunity is going to be able to act effectively when we have the right shared understanding, when we have things we can do, and we have community to do it together. And I think those three things may be necessary and sufficient. And I think we're good on community. There are more than enough of us, but we're not unified in the way we need to be. And I've been trying to think about why. And I've been trying to think about this 1,000-day problem, although I didn't have as good a name for it until a few minutes ago. I think everyone on the planet is going from a state of naive complacency in which we've been blessed with a fertile planet, and we're beginning to notice the exponential degradation. And that produces a sense of urgency. And the way we respond, the way humanity, and perhaps the rest of life responds to this urgency is going to determine our future. If we don't have anything we know how to do about it, we're going to lapse into despair. If we have a sense of agency and hope, well, different things can happen. The despair model just takes us into hell. And I think there's a very real chance that that will happen. But agency and hope are not enough. If our sense of agency is based on a misunderstanding of the situation, and it's based on the bad guidance that is readily available, we're going to go through a period of action, misdirected action, and again, we're going to be stuck with tragedy and lost opportunity. So I think one of the 100-day cycles is going to need to figure out how to do that, because I think the current model is in fact taking us on this unhappy pathway, whereas this community, not just the people at this meeting, but those we affiliate with and those who we know are doing the good work out there, can offer good understanding and good guidance, which will lead to meaningful action, which will get us up here to where we belong. And at the heart of this fork in the road, I think, is the distinction between what I'm going to call our living Earth paradigm and the standard model. I'm not going to go into this detail because I think I'm preaching to the choir, but I heard Bill McKibben give one of his very compelling presentations recently, in which he laid out a model that everyone now gets, right? Fossil fuels, elevating greenhouse gases, producing the greenhouse effect, producing climate change, producing an eco-crisis, and the solution is obvious, right? Stop burning fossil fuels and we can fix it. But that model is dangerously misleading. It's just not true. Stopping emissions, for example, is going to take centuries before we actually lower greenhouse gases, but the oceans are already so supercharged. The important point, I think, one of the pivot points is to recognize that abuse of land and water predates fossil fuels, that deforestation and desertification have been going on for thousands and thousands of years, and that process is the one we can and should address. The simple model is not wrong, but it's missing just a few more points which may potentially steer people up in the right direction. And here I am not going to go through the basic biology, but I will point out that degraded land, and this is just my attempt to identify a way of undermining the standard model, degraded land has released as much CO2 as fossil fuels. Water vapor and dusty haze absorbs more heat in the greenhouse gas layer than CO2 does. And its loss of foliage results in what really matters, which is loss of cooling, loss of climate regulation. Therefore, we need to look to life, land, and water. And I'm not going to talk you through this because I know most of you understand the importance of soil biology. But I will point out that all of the modern plagues are potentially fixable via eco-restoration if we're guided by the right model. And again, I'm not going to go through it, But I would point out that the standard model versus, I'm sorry, this should say the living Earth paradigm, takes us through a series of very different implications. One that is just really helpful. If you slow water upstream, the obvious and false implication is that it's going to decrease water downstream, but it actually increases water upstream for reasons that we don't have to go into.
I'm just flagging time if you could wrap in a moment.
And I'm really going to be done in 60 seconds. Thank you. We are struggling with these dueling paradigms. They take us in opposite directions, some of which can be fatal. And we need to break through on that conversation in order to end up where we need to go. I think one of the solutions is to get us on the same page. And I am involved in a project that I would like any of you to suggest content for, which is the Big Map to Save the Future, in which I'm simply trying to put down pins, not details, not impact assessments, just pins for ongoing effective actions all over the planet with profiles of those projects. Some of the ones I've heard today are going to end up on the map, I trust. And the point is that whether you're doing your backyard or you're doing the Amazon, I think we all need to converge on some big maps with shareable data, and it needs to be easy and compelling for everyone on the planet to take responsibility for their piece of the ground and to spread the word so that we can have a shared understanding and turn our cacophony of voices into a chorus that will be heard globally.
Thank you so much, John. I can't imagine a better, I didn't plan this, but I can't imagine a better transition from the session on knowledge commons to funding ecological restoration beyond a carbon lens. So thank you very, very much. Welcome to those who joined for this next session. We'll be getting started in just a moment. I'm just wrapping this current session on knowledge commons and sharing best practices. And thank you all for what you shared. I think you've just sparked the beginning of something, but with such great depth, because it's so clear that all of you have been sort of right at the threshold for years. And so as we close out this session, I'd love to just do a quick popcorn for 30 seconds, a minute of any word or a couple words that come to mind for those who participated around what you think that threshold is, whether it's what you're stuck against or what you think is right beyond it. If you can just sort of take turns calling out what you think that sort of threshold moment is, and I'll give us no more than a minute for that, and then we'll wrap.
I think synchronization and putting all of our pressure on some well-defined spear points is our big challenge and opportunity.
Thank you.
You're muted, Nathan. I'm trying to say something.
All right, excuse me, from the perspective that I introduced with some passion earlier, I think we've got to develop a tool set for shifting paradigm, shifting worldviews. As my dear friend and partner, the late Danella Meadows, pointed out, and unless and until we shift worldview away from the materialistic, the particularistic, to a unity, an experience of unity, of oneness with nature. And that is the gift we have from our indigenous brothers and sisters that we need to communicate. And then the data becomes cosmological, it becomes spiritual, it becomes value rich, not just materialistic or hard data rich, which of course is also essential. And I'm very much grateful for being included in this and intrigued by what I've learned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. A couple more, David.
Yeah, I would see if we have any way that we can actually start, instead of focusing on our own thing, have, like they said, the difference between heaven and hell with the long spoons. If we can't feed ourselves with a long spoon, if we can feed each other and find a way to dedicate a portion of our time and resources to another organization and possibly even collectively focus on one issue a month or one organization a month. What can we do if everyone harness their skills, their wisdom, their insights, all towards solving one problem at a time, and then we just keep rotating until all of them get solved.
Thanks, David.
I want to build on that. I think 10% time pledge to start with until we get up to 100%. But I think what is very important, and looking at elections, looking at what is happening in the political systems, in the policy systems, in the systems that actually build the legal structures for what we're talking about here. Caitlin, Jamaica, your work is so important because one thing for me is cross-interest coalitioning. We have to learn to build forward. And here I would say what I've heard, yes, it would be great to have a joint vision. But the time we have and the structures I see in front of me don't allow for the deep code change, for waiting for the deep code change. We still have to do the work. But what I invite to is to say, how can we build coalitions with people we don't like? How can we go beyond the kind of resistance and reach out to other partners that are important in what we want to do? And how can we build peer accountability with these, let's say, other agents in the game to actually move things forward to the next level, where we can slowly build a different type of intervention. So I'm very grateful and I'm very inspired to actually see what you're doing. I think it's about organizing it in a slightly different way so we make a bigger dent. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I think that's a wrap on this session. Thank you all so very much. I pasted a moment ago the Miro in the chat again so that you all can have access to that and to one another's info, and the links that were shared will also be following up with all participants with the recordings. And I also put here, I'm pasting in the chat, the invite link if you haven't yet to join the group for Open Future Forum on the Open Impact platform as well. And so there will be a space there for you to connect with one another, participate in discussions, and we'll be prompting in that space with some future opportunities as well. So thank you. I'm going to stop record on this session and start the next one.